Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Bob Bryan. I'm the Senior Director of Advisory Services at Drummond Group. We have a group of people today from Drummond Advisory. Uh, we have our two senior consultants, Greg Romania and Jim Dow, and we're going to talk about HTI 1. We'll go for about 30 minutes today. HTI 1 is the new proposed rulemaking that came out from ONC for uh, certified EHRs. Um, so, looking forward to having a good chat today. Greg and Jim, how are you guys doing?
Doing well, thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Doing good. There's been a lot to unpack. It's like little corners in the suitcase. You keep discovering things. So looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, now I know just a little introduction for people that may not have been uh, real focused on this proposed rule. Um, the it came out a few months ago, and the proposed rule from ONC again is called HTI 1, and the comment period just closed on the 20th. So comments are in, and we're basically at the point now where we'll wait to see what comes out in the final rule. Um, and I think first, I just wanted to ask you guys, what are the big topic areas that have come out in this rule that make it important to developers that are out there? Jim, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, the some of the major areas had to do with the replacement of 89 clinical decision support with new criteria B11 decision support interventions, and so that's a big one. Um, Also, the introduction of USCDI version 3 as being a new baseline, and that'll affect a lot of different criteria. And then the last one that I've been focusing on is one of those ones that doesn't it kind of hides for a while, but the introduction of D11, new privacy and security criteria, patient restricted access. So those are the three ones that I've been focusing on.
Um, the and I know then there's also this insights condition that's involved too, and I think that's a new reporting requirement. Greg, uh, are you have you had much of a chance to look at insights and what it means
Yeah,
for developers?
it is. It's a new reporting requirement that's going to be addressed through the conditions and maintenance of certification attestation process. So there will be a bi-yearly reporting cycle. Um, beginning the way it looks right now, beginning in April of 2025 will be the first time the insights conditions will need to be reported. There's a portion of the total measures that are going to be uh, required through this particular piece. I think there's four measures in the first year, and then the second year picks up with four additional measures, and then you'll continually report against those measures over time. Um, One of the things that you want to think about there is, we also have real world testing. Real world testing, anybody that's certified today has to report plan and results. This does differ. The insights condition does differ from the perspective of when it's reported. First of all, again, like I said, it's during this um, the maintenance, uh, the conditions and maintenance of certification processes, as opposed to the November time frame and the May time frame for real world testing. The other thing with insights is it doesn't apply to all certified developers. There's a certain, or there are parameters there that will dictate whether or not you have to report the insights. Some of them are if you have at least 50 hospital users or 500 clinical users of your product, that will necessitate your reporting. So that's a little bit of a difference between the insights condition and real world testing.
So if I'm understanding this insights reporting, it will be in addition to the real world testing, which has to be reported at the beginning of each year. And this reporting will be aligned with the semi-annual attestations that developers are currently doing.
So in April and October. So there's two times within a year that you'll have to report these measures.
Okay. So it looks like the first one would be then in April of 2025, assuming that the final rule comes out with the same schedule that was published in the proposed rule.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to look much at the specific types of reporting and how it's different from real world testing?
Yeah, so there's specific areas that ONC is looking to gain information about. Some of them include, individual access to EHI, use of fire technologies. Obviously, that's been a major driver of the ONC program, using APIs, deployment of fire. So they want to, through this process, gain insight into the deployment of those technologies within the real world. Other areas are clinical care exchange and public health information exchange. And one of the behind the scenes reasons for this process is the ONC wants to gain real world insight into these specific areas so that they can use that information then to drive future rulemaking. They'll get more specific with the types of or how they want the technology to be used and deployed in future rulemaking. So this is an important step to get to that point.
Do you think there are ways that developers will be able to kind of combine the process they're using for real world testing with the gathering of some of this other data that is involved with the insights condition?
Well, my initial take on that is from an official response perspective, given that they're each have their own timelines, each have their own purpose, I don't see there being a combination from the perspective of submitting the responses, but I certainly think that developers can build an internal process, while they're working on real world testing and the insights conditions reporting, they can combine that effort within their organization to be more efficient. But the reporting is going to be very different, I think, at this point in time. Like you said, until ONCs gets through all the comments, we don't really know how this is going to look at the end of the day. But for now, they're separate.
And I know, Jim, in terms of the various topics that are in HTI 1, there's a couple different deadlines in the proposed rule, which again, we don't know whether those deadlines will stick. But how are the different new requirements grouped in terms of the deadlines at the end of 2024 and the end of 2025?
Yeah, that's a good one. We've been working with clients, early, trying to help the development teams lay out roadmaps, even though we know that things will change. But and these were some of the things that were difficult to unpack in the final rule. And when I took a deep dive, was able to finally figure out what these two deadlines encompassed. So, end of 2024, or if you want to call it January 1st, 2025, is in the proposed rule, the deadline for updating all criteria to US CDI version 3. And so that obviously affects a lot of criteria. There are some standard updates for CCDAs and implementation guides. Then you've got your new criteria, D14. You've got I'm sorry, D14. I'm going to that in a second. That's going to be at the end of 2025. So it's primarily that first end of 2024 is going to be all changes required for USCDI version 3.
And
Yeah, go ahead.
And I know you mentioned decision support intervention, which is replacing the clinical decision support criteria. Is that one
It is. It is.
next year or the end of the following year?
No, so that is by the end of 2024.
Okay.
And so and I'd like to come back if we have time to DSI in more detail. But the second group is, and this is what was kind of hidden, is when you would see this end of year 2025 or January 1st, 2026. And so it's kind of a phased approach. So in that part of the roadmap on the current proposal is everything related to what they're calling patient-restricted access. So this has to do with data segmentation, security, enabling a patient to be empowered to identify USCDI classes and elements they do not want to have shared or restricted sharing. And so that is the new D14 patient requested restrictions, new privacy and security criteria. This affects E1, view, download, and transmit. That's the interface, the internet interface where a patient will have the ability to identify that restriction. We're all really interested to find out what that will entail. And then, as you can imagine, with that type of segmentation in place, that's going to affect most of the interoperability criteria that are doing exports or FHIR access.
So it sounds like we've got two big things in this rule that stretch across many certification criteria. One is USCDI version 3, which has a deadline at the end of next year. And then patient restricted access also touches a lot of other criteria, capabilities, and it has a deadline at the end of the following year. So basically 2.5 years out from now.
Right. If everything went through as planned, I mean, beyond customer requests, the most important part for enhancements, developers are going to have their hands full for a couple of years. So you got a roadmap of meeting HTI requirements and kind of in the first phase by the end of 2024. Phase 2, everything related to patient restricted access and the effects of that. There are a couple other miscellaneous things like insights that phase out as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious in terms of how this affects developers and what they should be thinking about in terms of FHIR strategy. Any thoughts on what developers should be thinking about in terms of FHIR strategy with this rule now in play?
Yeah, launching off what Jim was talking about, fundamentally a lot of the new standards that are being introduced in this rule, USCDI, CCDA Companion Guide Revision 3, also includes US Core Implementation Guide 5.0.1 and Smart App version 2. So those latter two definitely will impact a strategy for API and FHIR deployment. With Smart App, looking at evolving the security around APIs, the authentication, the authorization, etc. that'll have impacts on the development of those technologies. A side note there as I'm talking about it, so the US Core IG 5.0.1, there is a likelihood that, though it's not currently approved, that version 6 will be what's incorporated in the final rule. Right now 5.0.1 is what's written into the rule. There is an anticipation that 6.0 will be available, and if so, then that'll become the de facto standard. And that'll benefit everybody across the board, because that'll bring that particular standard in line with the US CDI version 3.
And I guess there is also a potential for the SVAP standards version advancement process to be used as well, even though some of these final standards will be a year and a half or 2.5 years out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, developers today can take advantage of SVAP, build their product to meet those future requirements, kind of get you ahead of the curve. So, that's one thing that, we would encourage our developers to think about. You don't have to wait until the final rule is out. You can develop to those standards now and, again, be ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I think the specific adoption of US CDI version 3 for SVAP purposes is expected to be finalized this summer. Mm-hmm. So that will actually be available as a standard, within a month or so, probably, right, through the SVAP process.
Yes.
So I guess that, considering that it will stretch across a variety of criteria, it, I guess, puts developers in a position where they can gradually update criteria as opposed to trying to do it all at once around December of next year.
Mm-hmm.
They can start moving in that direction gradually now, using the SVAP process.
Correct. Yes.
So I think the big area that we haven't really talked much about yet is the move from the clinical decision support criteria to this new decision support intervention criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Jim, could you just briefly talk about where we are today with the CDS criteria?
Yeah, and redirect me if I start deep diving too fast. But A9, clinical decision support, provides clinician staff with patient-specific information that's filtered, that interventions are presented to the user in certain workflows based on certain conditions, call them rule-based interactions with all different US CDI elements, medications, problems, etc. So that exists today. It involves, as people are familiar with, configuration of those different intervention settings, problems, medications, allergies, demographics, laboratories, vital signs. Then also presenting during those workflows, presenting those evidence-based decision support interventions. And so what's presented is configured, bibliographic information, what the attributes are, the author of certain clinician-facing articles, revisions, and things like that. So those are the different source attributes are available as well. It also involves the triggering of those interventions based on incorporating CCDAs. So with the introduction of B11, None of that has changed. So you can think of they're providing a new label and a new criteria identifier, B11, decision support intervention. And the reason they're doing that is they're like rebranding it and getting ready for the next stage, which is dipping their toe in the machine learning, and so thus the introduction of predictive decision support intervention.
So when you say nothing has changed, you mean that the requirements that are in the existing rule today are still there, but there are some new things that have come in B11, aren't there?
Correct. So we'll not talk about predictive support yet, but what has changed is that affects the configuration of the information, the interactions, or the introduction of user device UDIs, implantable devices, and procedures. So those are new USCDI data categories and elements that now current systems need to update their software to support configuring, triggering, setting up rules for those interventions, and displaying the evidence-based decision support information. So the addition of the UDIs and procedures as part of that decision support is new. Nothing has changed for the linked referential decision support, and that's where we get into. Sorry, here we took one with him. That had to do with the info button. Both the SOA and the other standard of info button, there is requested comments in the proposed rule on the future of using info button. So it'll be interesting to see what people come up with there. There are a couple other new things I'd mention. There's something under configuration, and once the interventions are presented, to enable end user feedback and to be able to export in a machine readable format. So that's brand new, and that'll have to be added.
Yeah, and I did want to mention we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left, but if anyone does have questions, feel free to submit those, and we'll try to get to them in the time we have. And I did want to I wanted to get into, you've mentioned predictive DSI a couple times, which I know is covered by the rule. And I think that's an important one because many developers are moving in the direction of incorporating AI or machine learning capabilities,
Right.
and probably in many cases around clinical decision support. What's new in the rule that would affect those development plans, and what should developers be thinking about as they move into the AI machine learning space with their products?
Yeah, I mean, we think ONC is approaching this in the right way, coming out slowly. In that first year, if the proposed rule gets finalized by the end of 2024, all that's going to be required is, first of all, is an attestation, yes or no, that your product enables or interacts with PDSI, and so it's not going to be required. So if it's a no, then basically all the current clinical evidence-based decision support interventions are utilized. If the answer is yes, and there's two ways that they're looking at defining the implementation of PDSI, is what they use the term enable. and that's if the developer has developed or using in-house or partner developed PDSI, and then there's also what they call interfacing with, and that's if a developer is interfacing with a third party implementing predictive support. So it's good in that first year. It's allowing a segue for everybody to learn more about predictive support. If the attestation answer is yes, then there's a lot of work involved. So not only the implementation of machine learning, I slash AI, but there's requirements for risk management, risk analysis, risk mitigation, governance. There's a lot of concern, as appropriate, that this is transparent and that any ways that the predictive support algorithms are designed, that is transparent, and that the quality is known, and that there's a feedback mechanism on those.
And does that yes answer also, is that what triggers the attribute export requirements and the feedback loop?
No, the export is required whether using evidence-based only or predictive decision support. So it applies to both.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
the
so from
ability
a,
to provide a feedback loop exporting, because PDSI will have the same requirements to have attributes, source attributes. There'll be some new attributes for predictive support. For example, intervention details, how it was developed, what the quantitative measure is, ongoing maintenance requirements, and so that'll be part of predictive support.
okay. So I think, so it sounds like the definitional distinction is between um, the predictive and evidence-based. Evidence-based being the old approach, or the current approach, and
Right.
then predictive is the new approach. Um,
Right, and it's interesting because some of the questions I was proposing to myself this morning was looking at that. Oh, and I'm interested in the comments. Is it could be that PDSI is enabled only for some of the U.S. CDI categories, some of the intervention types. And so, does that mean there's a possibility that some of the interventions are still evidence based, some of them are predictive support based? So, I
okay.
could see that possibility. And
Um,
the other question is, okay, so we implement PDSI. Do we have to also support evidence based at the same time? That's not really answered anywhere in the proposed rule. But
I
it's
know we're about out of time. There was one question about the insights condition and whether it will have any change, make or cause any changes or impacts to real world testing. And Greg, I know we talked a little bit about that. It sounds like you're viewing them as still two separate processes that might be able to be integrated from a management perspective,
Yeah.
but they're still two separate types of reporting.
Right.
Do you see anything changing with real world testing as a result of insights?
Not that I have been able to find.
We're early
Certainly once.
looking at
Nope,
this.
I'm sorry.
I said I know we're early in looking at this.
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see what kind of comments that they received in terms of the different types, because they're very close in nature as far as the type of information they're gathering. The insights, I think, is more specific as opposed to real world testing. But as it stands now, there's been nothing that I've seen that would change real world testing. But we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time. Thanks to everyone who was able to join us today. Greg and Jim, thanks for
Thank you.
your insights in these early days of looking at the proposed rule. I think we're expecting maybe by the end of the year, we will have the final rule so that developers will at least have a full year to meet that first deadline at the end of next year. And it looks like there's a number of things that, particularly US CDI version 3, that developers may want to start looking at now. And also thinking about how any AI machine learning capabilities that they're building in might be affected by these rules so that they can start to incorporate the new requirements into those plans. So that's it for us today. Thanks everyone for attending. And if there are any specific questions you had, feel free to reach out to any of us. You can always reach us at advisoryservices@drummondgroup.com. And any of us can respond to those questions and get back to you. So thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.